पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
दुर्गति नाशिनी दुर्गा जय जय।
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 काल विनाशिनी काली 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 जय जय।
उमा रमा ब्रह्माणी 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 जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
दुर्गति नाशिनी दुर्गा जय जय।
दुर्गति नाशिनी दुर्गा जय जय।
काल विनाशिनी काली जय जय।
काल विनाशिनी काली जय जय।
उमा रमा ब्रह्माणी जय जय।
उमा रमा ब्रह्माणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
काली महेश्वरी पार्वती शंकरि शरणं 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 मां।
दुर्गति नाशिनी दुर्गा जय जय।
दुर्गति नाशिनी दुर्गा जय जय।
काल विनाशिनी काली जय जय।
काल विनाशिनी काली जय जय।
उमा रमा ब्रह्माणी जय जय।
उमा रमा ब्रह्माणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रुक्मिणी जय जय।
राधा सीता रूपिणी जय जय।
दशरथ नंदन राम।
अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन राम। दशरथ नंदन
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन राम।
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 अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन 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 राम।
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन 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 राम।
अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन राम।
अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन राम।
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन राम।
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन राम।
अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन राम।
अयोध्यावासी राम 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 दशरथ नंदन राम।
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन राम।
पतित पावना जानकी जीवन सीता मोहन राम।
ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। So this morning we started discussing Karma Yoga, but we explained that Karma means action and Yoga means a set of values and attitudes, in simple terms. We started discussing values. In fact, there is one value, and that we already described and discussed. And what's that value? Ahimsa, or non-violence. I should not do unto others what I do not want them to do to me. That's one aspect. Ahimsa means not hurting anybody. That's the usual translation of ahimsa. Himsa means hurting some other living beings. Praninam pidanam, pidanam. Causing pain to praninam, to other living beings, is called himsa or violence. Ahimsa, standard explanation is praninam apidanam. Not causing pain to other living beings is called ahimsa. So why do they have to tell us to do this? And ahimsa or non-violence is taught by all great masters. Not only Vedas teach us, the Yoga Shastra written by sage Patanjali talks about Ashtanga Yoga, yoga of 8 stages or 8 steps. Of that, the first step is called Yama. Yama is self-restraint. Yama means restraint. What is taught first is restraining oneself. What one should not do. Now, some years ago, when I was talking to an audience which was a Western audience, the students of yoga, this Swamiji, these days, we are told that you should not tell people what they should not do. Tell them what they should do. Well, what can I do? This Yoga Shastra begins with the first initial step called Yama, self-restraint. What we should not do? How come they teach us this? What we should not do? Because we are born with tendencies to do something. So himsa or violence is something very natural to human beings, not all living beings. Swamiji, you may question this. What do you mean, Swamiji, there is no violence by other creatures? We see one creature surviving on the other creatures. In Sanskrit it says, Jivo Jivasya Jivanam. One life form depends upon other life form. This is how the creation is. For reason best known to him, the order created in the universe is that one life form depends upon other life form. And so we see creatures living upon other creatures. And from that standpoint, one may conclude that there is violence everywhere. Isn't so? You see in the monsoon in India, all those moths are there, the creatures are there. This lizard goes. These fellows are very smart. Cats are very smart. Lizards are very smart. You can see that this live upon other living beings, and is it not violence? I would say it is not violence. Because in nature, no entity or a creature kills another one for the sake of killing. They prey upon others when they are hungry, but not that the tiger goes around and, preys upon anything and everything. No, even a lion also, when it's fed, sits there. We told you yesterday how they take from the nature what they need. And that is what, as you know very well, maintains the ecological balance. Meaning that the kind of so-called violence that we see is not violence. It is not killing for the sake of killing. Not killing out of anger. Not killing out of jealousy. Not killing out of greed. is killing out of need. And therefore, that killing is only to the extent of satisfying the need and no more. Unfortunately, human being is not like that. We are the most evolved creatures. At the same time, unfortunately, the most violent creatures. I think it is in Bronx Zoo or some place like that. We enter the zoo, there's a question. Because zoo, so many violent animals are there. So there the question is, who is the most violent creature? And then give you some time to think about it. The answer is found in the next station. What is the answer? A mirror. You know what it means? That human being is the most violent creature. Why am I saying this? Because we are born with tendency to violate, to hurt. Unfortunately. Why is it so? Because we have these impulses in our mind. Called impulse. Anger is an impulse. When that impulse arises in my mind, and if I am not alert, if I am not aware, if I am not strong enough, that impulse takes over me. That is called impulse, which when arises, takes over me, controls me, and what I do is determined by that impulse and not by myself. When anger takes over me, what I do is determined by anger. At that time, the free will is no more there. That deliberation is no more there. The free will is sacrificed because I am controlled by that impulse of anger. And then whatever is done by me is going to be violent. There are other impulses also. Lord Krishna identifies 3 impulses. In the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Trividam narakasyedam dvaram nachanamatmanaha kamaha krodhaha tatha lobhaha. Kamaha, lust or craving, krodhaha, anger, lobhaha, greed. Lord Krishna says these are the sources of all sorrow and suffering. What causes suffering in our life are these 3 entities: kamaha, krodhaha, lobhaha. Kama, craving. Could be translated as lust, but here craving, meaning a desire which takes over me, which I cannot control. Krodhaha, anger. Lobhaha, greed. It will be interesting to note that no other creature has these impulses. In nature, other than human, nobody gets angry. There is no jealousy, no resentment, no anger. Why am I saying we can learn the lesson from the nature? That's why. Because you people are very conscious or conscientious people and very aware of the environment and ecological balance. You're very awareful people. So just as, of course, we should learn how to contribute to maintaining the balance in the ecological balance, but the ecological balance will take care of itself if we do not interfere. If human being was not born, there was heaven on this universe. And we had glimpses of that. You know when? We had glimpses of heaven on the earth. Do you know when? During COVID. During COVID, when human being was locked up in the house. I'm sure you must have watched on TV how many animals were just coming out, how the rivers were clean and flowing, how beautiful the nature was. The trees and the rivers, everything was just blossoming, blooming. Do you remember? Have you seen this? The ocean, I mean, the lakes were so clean. Animals were, fearless. Some of them came out on the street. How did that happen? Because human being stopped violating. I mean, you know this quite. I think you are conscious about this environment, ecological balance, and so-called global warming. And the solution that they provide for global warming, when these conferences take place, Paris 21, this and whatever, these conferences take place, world leaders gather, and what is the solution for global warming? Technological development. And so the technocrats will say, we'll develop technology to reduce, the pollution created by power generation, etc., or alternative source of power generation. You must be aware. What is one thing that they do not discuss? Did you know it? What is one thing that these great leaders and scientists and whatever else they do not discuss? What is that? That reduce consumption. Countries like India make this, nobody here listens to them. Hey, you just reduce the consumption. Some years ago there was a research, somebody in Japan or some scientist calculated and said that one pound of red meat, by the time it comes to the kitchen, it has consumed energy equivalent to a motor car running at 85 miles an hour for 3 hours. You start from the animal feed, from there on to the kitchen table or dining table. That is a no. That is not available for any discussion. Or that is given that we will consume and we will squander. We want. Why do you create these gas guzzling cars, and why do you consume so much of gasoline, fuel? We want that. Huge palatial building houses we are living in, and so much air conditioning, heating, so much energy is being spent. That is given. Why do you build your houses in such remote places and you have to commute miles and miles every day? That we want to live there. Work here and live there. That is not available for discussion. So understand, what is the cause of global warming? Human consumption. You can talk about the emissions by the power stations consuming fossil fuel, and that is not so. But provided you consume power, that to generate power, then you have to burn this fossil fuel, and then you have all these kind of pollutants. Isn't it so? Yes, I am deliberately talking to you because you all know all this. And therefore, non-violence presupposes also, on our part, minimizing consumption. Minimizing the resources of nature that they use for our sustenance. I know that that's not going to happen. Nobody is going to change the lifestyle, and that is not a consideration at all, but just for your information. We simply change our diet. You eliminate this red meat in the diet. That's all. Global warming is gone. It's all gone. And do other things that is possible to do. No, Swami, that we can't do. Why am I saying our scriptures have noted that this human being is born with a tendency to violate? Because he is self-centered. What matters to me is my interest. You can see everywhere everywhere what matters is only self-interest. At the highest level, now that is not our... But that's all violence. The countries also decide their policies, including their way of doing business, and whatever they do, self-interest. Exploiting others. This is all violence. Not that you and I can do anything about it. But some of the young people have values. Swami, I want to work for United Nations, for this agency, that agency, I want to work for women's rights, I want to do for... there are some idealistic people who are intelligent, who are smart and capable, and they can make a lot of money. And still some of them want to do this. This is not, I'm not telling you what to do, by the way. This is not a sermon. This is simply sharing with you, what is the knowledge available to us. Nothing. I'm not telling you what to do. That's not Vedanta. That's not Vedanta teacher who advises you. No. It's not an advisor. Not a consultant. Not as giving a sermon. Teaching means only enabling, making you understand, that's all. You decide what to do, what not to do. But all I am saying is how these things are built into our life. And the so-called progress, this is a very well-known saying which our Puja Swami is very fond of quoting. What is progress? Converting luxuries into necessities. What is called progress? Converting luxuries into necessities. Comfort, another saying in English, comfort comes as guest, lingers on to become host. Comfort comes as a guest, lingers on to become host, and stays on to enslave you. It comes as a guest, lingers on to become host, and stays on to enslave you. So what is progress? If progress is converting, what is a necessity? Luxurious necessities, meaning creating more and more needs and necessities in our life, creating more and more dependence in our life. Whereas 100 years ago, perhaps our great-great-grandfathers needed 50 things in their life. 50 years ago, our grandfathers may have needed 500 things in their life. Today we need 5,000 things in our life. So-called progress is nothing but expanding our dependence and bondage. Just to understand this. So this is what the universe calls progress. And there is nothing to be done, there is something to be understood. When we have the right understanding, then we have the capacity to make right choices. All of this discussion is to help us use our free will, which is freedom given to us, so that we can grow and we can create happiness for us. Nobody else has that privilege. Unfortunately, what can be a blessing can also become a curse, and human being, if you feel that he is not a happy creature, it is because of abuse of free will. Use of free will makes you happy, abuse of free will makes you unhappy. They are simple things to understand. Whereas we associate happiness with luxuries, with wealth, power, fame, success. They're all fine. We already said yesterday. Comfort is one thing, happiness is another thing. Happiness is subjective. It is a state of mind. It cannot be described in terms of something, in terms of wealth, etc. So you do create wealth for yourself. Create comfort for yourself, do that. But along with that also, create the inner values. There are two kinds of wealth we have. One is the external wealth. Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth. And Saraswati also is goddess. Lakshmi is goddess of wealth. Saraswati is goddess of knowledge. Goddess of wisdom. So whereas you are applying yourself to creating the wealth, which certainly you should do, because that's a contribution. Creating wealth, by doing that you are contributing. So creation is a wonderful thing to do. Consumption is what we have to decide. And that is why inner wealth is created. So two wealth, outer wealth and inner wealth. So that is the wealth that we are talking about. This is what is a means of happiness. The Bhagavad Gita talks about this. The whole 16 chapters devoted to these two kinds of tendencies. The divine tendencies and the demoniac tendencies. We have both of them, unfortunately. Why is there a Swami? Why has God created like this? I don't know. Why has He created this kind of evil? Why is there evil in this world? Question arises. I shouldn't say I don't know, I know. Because of ignorance. But why ignorance? That I do not know. But that we are born, and everybody. But ignorance doesn't matter to other creatures because they cannot misuse and abuse the power that they have. Ignorance becomes very critical for a human being because ignorance makes me abuse my freedom, abuse my power. So all these things called anger, greed, jealousy, it all brings about abuse of power. And that's why only human being is capable of violence. And therefore, non-violence becomes a basic value. The hinsat sarva bhutani, Veda says that you should not hurt any living being. Not possible. We cannot live our life without hurting others. Because, as we said, but Swamiji, so the common question that is asked by people who are smart, they think they have cornered the Swami. You're talking about Swami violence and talking about non-vegetarian, vegetarian food and stuff like that. Because what will Swami say? You should be vegetarian, that's non-violent, non-veg, eating meat is violence. But But Swamiji, even when you are vegetarian also, not consuming vegetables. Don't vegetables have life? Does it not mean that you are also violent? I would say yes. That yes, we consume vegetables, etc., etc. And they are also live entities. A life form must eat live things. We cannot eat lifeless things, by the way. You can't eat stones and rocks and stuff like that. What can sustain the live body is live thing. Organic, whatever. Otherwise, simplify. So we need live food. And thereby plants, vegetables, all of them are live things that alone can sustain or support the life. So yes, to that extent there is violence in our life. Even for a vegetarian person, there is also violence because he consumes. Therefore, in the olden days, there was an ideal. Not possible, not necessary, but ideal. Our rishis or sages who lived in forests would survive on fruits and roots. Hopefully fruits that have fallen down from the trees to minimize their consumption. But this is all, these are all ideas. It is true that even when we are vegetarian, there is certain amount of violence involved, is unavoidable. Meaning that non-violence at this physical level cannot be total. You can call it alpa violence, minimize violence. At the physical level, we minimize violence. Don't cause unnecessary or avoidable violence can be removed, eliminated. But violence also happens at other levels. We perform actions at 3 levels. Level of body, level of speech, level of mind. We perform actions at 3 levels. Body, speech and mind. And through any of these actions we can hurt others. By actions performed at the level of body also we can hurt human being, cuts down trees, cuts down forests and things like that. Apart from gross violence that we see. Thus we can hurt other living beings by our physical actions. And I'm sure that we are very conscious about that. But it's interesting, just for your general information. They said some violence is unavoidable in our life. Our sages identified 5 sources of violence in the life of an ordinary person. Those days, agrarian society, they're living on agriculture. Vedic times. Where there were no fuels, there were no cars, there was no chimneys, there are no, those kind of things are not there. And still there was violence. Even in a simple living also is violence. So, it is said in the Smriti, Kandani, Peshani, Chulli, Udukumbi, Chamarjani. Our Shivamji would know all this. Kandani, Peshani, Chulli, Udukumbi, Chamarjani. Imagine the life of a simple farmer. But that also, person also has to do minimum things. Pounding, grinding, cooking, sweeping, and carrying water and filling water. So this is the minimum thing you have to do to live. in those days even, in a village also, in simple living. All these five involve violence. When you pound, likely that you might hurt some insects. Grinding, cooking, burning firewood, carrying water, heating water, and sweeping the floor. Many insects also may be killed. This is just again for your information. How sensitive the people were. It's called sensitivity. The value of non-violence requires to be sensitive people. To those creatures also. And there were 5 areas unavoidable violence were noted. There may be avoidable violence, unavoidable violence, just to live your day-to-day simple life. So what should you do? They said that, well, because in your day-to-day living there is this unavoidable violence, you should compensate. So when we know that we have done something wrong, then they ask for compensation, act of prayaschitta, propitiation. Do something to support. So again, just for information, in one of the, was it last year before last, here in the children's program they had this a theme of Pancha Mahayajna. The 5 great yajna or sacrifices that a householder was prescribed or was required to perform every day. To compensate for the unavoidable violence. Now, idea is that this is called sensitivity. That is, I am doing something which is unavoidable violence, then I should do something about it. Sorry, that's not enough. You said something, I'm sorry. All right. Do something. When we find that we have done something which is not right, ideally we should do something that is right. I said something, other person is sorry. That's easy to say. And who knows what it, sorry is just a word, is a lip service or anything goes behind that. Sorry. No, do something to make that person comfortable, contribute something to the comfort of the person. Meaning that non-violence involves also contributing in compensation of the consumption that we may have done. This is just a basic principle. So much sensitivity. In those days when life was so simple, the consumption was essentially minimum. And still, an awareness that we should compensate for whatever we are consuming. So violence at physical level. Other physical violence we know, that's all abuse, etc., which is, you don't need to be told. And no decent people do that anyway. But other level of violence which is more difficult is a violence that takes place by our actions at the level of speech. That we can hurt somebody's feelings by our words. And very often people use as words as arrows. To deliberately let that person know, this is what I think, this is what you are. I'm so upset and so angry. How do I express my anger by my words? Meaning that we can hurt somebody's feelings by our words. Now, this is where alertness, awareness, conscientiousness is required. Because a lot of our communication takes place through words. And a lot of feelings are hurt by words. I mean, our seers have noted how words have been responsible for great wars. You know the Battle of Mahabharata? Where, the extreme violence took place. Hundreds of thousands of people died. That war can be traced to some words. Do you know that? You may have heard this. The eldest of Pandavas, his name was Yudhishthira. And Dhritarashtra agreed to give them half the kingdom, even though they were the real inheritors of the kingdom. Still, they were given half the kingdom. And therefore, Yudhishthira they built a new city. One is Hastinapura, other is Indraprastha. Indraprastha was the capital that Pandavas built, by the way, in a forest. And for initial ceremony, Yudhishthira performed a huge yajna called Rajasu yajna. For that Rajasu yajna, big palaces were created. And there is a great architecture, his name was Mayadanava, he was actually architect of Suras, but he created a big palace for Yudhishthira. And his creation was so vivid that he created floors which were so shining and clear that what was a solid floor looked like water. And he created pools of water in such that they look like solid floor. Imagine this. And Duryodhana is coming. Pandavas are there, Draupadi is there, they are all watching. Poor Duryodhana was really deluded by this. And what was solid land appeared to him to be water, and what was water appeared to him to be the land. So he was walking on the solid floor and lifting his clothes, because so that it shouldn't get wet. And when it came to water, he thought this is solid floor, and he fell down. He was watching. And Draupadi said, it's an unfortunate thing. She laughed at him. Was it a laughing stock? Yeah, it's very clear whose son you are. Whose son was he? Of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was born blind. So, in effect, Duryodhana was taunted as what? As blind. In front of everybody. Do you think Duryodhana is going to forget that? He would not. They say that he decided he can to take revenge. And ultimately the whole thing resulted into the Battle of Mahabharata. Whether this is just an example of how words can be so hurting. They can emerge from our mouths like arrows, which can strike the very vital parts of somebody and hurt the feelings of others. So this is where I think we have to be most careful when it comes to the value of non-violence. And Lord Krishna does say in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 17th chapter of the Gita, the Lord Krishna described the austerity of speech. He prescribed austerities, and one of the austerities Lord Krishna prescribed austerity of speech. What is austerity? Careful use. So Lord Krishna says that, describing austerity of speech, says, Anudvekaram vakyam satyam prihitam sayat. Vakyam meaning the words that you speak out. Before you say anything, Lord Krishna says, take these three things into account. Anudvekaram vakyam, your words should not perturb another person, should not hurt the feeling of other person. Satyam, what you say should be truthful. Priyam, the truth that you speak also should be spoken in pleasant manner. And fourth, even the truth that you speak in pleasant manner should also be spoken only if it is beneficial, not otherwise. Hitam. Can you imagine if the human beings observe this austerity of speech, there will be heaven in this earth. Is it not so? Most of the conflicts arise because of what we say, is it not so? Whereas we cannot change the world, all we can do is try to work upon ourselves and for our own sake. That before I am about to say something, that should go through this fourfold test. Will my words hurt the other person, one or more persons? What am I going to say? Is it truthful as I know it? Truth also we say, but sometimes very cleverly. In such a manner that fellow misunderstands. I told you this, I didn't say, but I said it in such a manner that the fellow understands it differently. Meaning truthful means honesty of intention. What I say, should make sure that does not hurt the feeling of others. What I say is truthful, as best as I know. Say it in a pleasant manner, and say only if it serves a purpose. This is a tough job, because then most of the speaking will perhaps will not justify it. But anyway, this is to whatever extent we can bring about these values in our speech. This is a very important thing and something we can work upon. Because human being has this great gift of speech. And that is the speech is now the great resource or the empowerment given to us for articulating our thoughts and expressing them in words. It's a wonderful gift. We don't know that anybody else has that. They talk about birds also, language of birds and language, and there are people who claim to understand. Maybe so. But human being has a great gift of speech, which well utilized will create peace everywhere. When not utilized, will create conflict everywhere. So thus, when we have a value for non-violence, also refraining from violence at the level of speech. So, non-violent level of physical action, non-violent level of the oral action or action of speech, non-violent level of the mental action, meaning in our thoughts. When we hate somebody, when we are resentful to somebody, when we are jealous of somebody, angry at somebody, wishing ill of somebody, which we do. I remember when I was in school, it was a town, not a big deal, and then so there in small town you shine. So I used to generally have first rank. Except that when we came to 11th grade, that's high school, that 11th year was last year. And some boy came to school from Bombay. This was Khambat, a small town. This fellow was very intelligent, very smart. I almost knew that I don't think I'll score the first grade. So what thought went on in my mind, What if this fellow falls sick at the time of examination? I wish he falls sick, cannot give examination, so he doesn't score first rank. Imagine myself thinking like that. So how jealousy, self-centeredness, self-interest can initiate a mode of thinking wherein I deliberately wish ill of other people. I often entertain thoughts of resentment towards others, anger towards others, injustice towards others, discrimination towards others because of my anger. So thus we have to be observant and aware of also a thinking process. Basically that's where it all begins. But there is another violence also, the subtlest form of violence. That is called spiritual violence. That is where the violence begins actually. What do you mean, Swami, spiritual violence? The violence that I carry out towards my own self. Hurting myself. Condemning myself. How come that violence? That is called ignorance. So we are born ignorant. Now this you must have heard. Ignorance of what? There are twofold ignorance. Ignorance of the world and ignorance about the self. Of the world is no problem because we go to schools and colleges and that ignorance slowly and slowly shut off. But what we are not aware of is that there is ignorance of the self. And this is a very hurtful ignorance because the ignorance of self is not only not knowing my true nature, but then taking myself to be contrary to what I am. You must have heard in Vedanta classes, I'm sure, you are Brahman, no, whatever that word means, you are Brahman. You are whole, you are complete. You are limitless. You must have heard these words. That's what the reality of self is. But how do I take myself to be? I take myself as a limited person, helpless. This is what I take myself to be. Meaning that I am born with this perception of myself. Not because of my fault. I am born like that. I am born with the false perception. I keep on branding myself. You are no good. You are small. You are limited. Inadequate. Lacking. Wanting. I keep on branding myself that way, and then all my actions proceed from this conclusions or judgment about myself. This is called violence of one nature. If there is an innocent person, we accuse that person. You are a thief, you are so and so. Just innocent person. Accusing an innocent person of some kind of an imaginary crime is also called violence. And thus, without even our knowledge, we are all the time pulling down ourselves, degrading ourselves. I'm small, I'm needy, I want this, I want that, I'm small, I'm limited, I'm helpless, I'm helpless. Please help me, please favor me. This kind of, there's nobody's fault, we are born that way. And that means that we are all the time branding ourselves quite contrary to what we are. So this can be called the spiritual violence. And that is the source of, so ultimately the person who is non-violent in the true sense is the one who is a wise person, who knows himself truly as he is. So how does this wise person, how does he think? The actions are all emerging from the thought. How does he think? How does he perceive? How does he look at things? So here Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Atma upamyena sarvatra samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukkham sayogi paramo mataha. Lord Krishna says, this person is supreme yogi. Even though we don't see him doing any pranayama, yogasana, nothing, still supreme yogi. Why? By one simple thing. He judges others by the standard with which he judges himself. Sukham va yadi va dukkham. Meaning that when he interacts with somebody, he places himself in that position and asks, what kind of treatment would I have expected had I been in that position? Simple question, simple thing, isn't it? But that's what he does. He places himself in the position of others and then asks, what would I have expected had I been in that position? What would you like? Suppose you made a mistake, would you like to be punished? Like to be forgiven? Suppose somebody has done something wrong, how should I treat that person? I place myself in that position, ask, if I had made that mistake, I had committed an offense, would I like to be punished? No, I would like to be forgiven. But that's what you do. I'm not saying you do that, but this is what the maturity, the wisdom results into this. Meaning that a wise person is non-violent in the total sense. Because one entity we never hurt is ourselves. My relation to myself is what? Always love myself. So if you want to know what love is, what you have for yourself? When I place myself on the person, meaning that I love that entity as much as I love myself. And in love there can be no violence. So this is an ideal that Bhagavad Gita places before us. This is just for information. All this is a very tall order. You don't expect anybody, including myself, to be able to live up to that level. But this is ideal. We told you this morning that we are born with a destination, with an agenda. This is our ideal. At least GPS tells you what the destination is. This is the destination. Ideally, I should grow in my maturity and goodness to such an extent that I see no difference between you and me. Meaning that I treat you as I would treat myself, or I would treat you as I would like to be treated, but I would treat myself. Explaining this verse, our great Bhagavan Shankara, have you heard the name of Shankaracharya? He is a commentator upon our great scriptures. This verse he explains. Says, Ahimsaka itya. This means this is a non-violent. Lord Krishna is describing non-violence when Lord Krishna says that a wise person sees others as he sees himself. Just as I would love to be happy, I know that you also would love to be happy. That I do not want to be unhappy, I know you also don't want to be unhappy. Not only that, but I do whatever I can to make myself happy, that's what I should do. I do whatever I can to avoid unhappiness to me, that's what I should do. The one who does it totally is called a saint. We are all saints to the extent that this is cultivated in us. To that extent, we become saintly people. A saint doesn't have any description, an external description of how he dresses and how he... This is what makes a person saint. And all of us are born and we are all have the potential of becoming this kind of saint. So that is the destination. Swamiji, I don't want, but you cannot. You are born with this destination, and until that is reached, we will not be able to rest. There will be no peace in our mind until we reach that destination. Meaning that true happiness comes to the extent that we are closer to the destination. So we are discussing how to be happy. And this is the way that Bhagavad Gita teaches us of how to be happy. Dalai Lama wrote a book, The Art of Happiness. And there are many books out there of happiness. And I bless all of them, and I do not know if anybody has any insight about what happiness is as Vedanta gives us. And so this is so non-violence is a value which makes our life yoga. And the extent to which it comes to our life, to the extent we become yogis. Sayogi Paramo Mataha, Lord Krishna, He is supreme yogi, who is totally non-violent. Now, that's an idea, but then, as I said, this should be our attempt to minimize the violence that we may knowingly or unknowingly doing it. That requires us to be alert, observant, sensitive, and committed. So this is how the Vedanta in the daily living. This is an important lesson that Vedanta or Bhagavad Gita gives us in our daily living. Okay, we'll continue. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.